Welcome to Extra Takes, hosted by Northland Church Senior Pastor, Dr. Joshua Laxton. Join us each week as Pastor Josh reveals the rest of the story behind his sermons. We'll discuss how those who follow Christ can live out a biblical vision for the church in our world today.
Well, hello, Northland family and friends. Hey, welcome to another episode of Extra Takes. I'm your co-host, PJ, along with Matt Shiles, who is a fresh graduate, wearing the hat and all. He didn't wear his gown, just the cap. I guess he didn't have a gown.
I didn't have the gown, but Kaylee got me a cap.
Got you a cap. So he had his graduation party, so congratulations.
Thank you.
On your graduation.
Thank you.
You have graduated with a master's at Gordon Conwell.
Yep, Masters of Christian Studies, Gordon Conwell up in Massachusetts.
So you have mastered Christian Studies, huh?
I don't know what to say to that.
Speechless.
You know the answer to that.
Well,
you don't master something like that.
Well, no, you are. So I always tell people, this is interesting when you look at higher education, right? You got college, masters, and then in some sense post graduate. So that's your doctorate and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so, really, college is supposed to kind of steer you in the realm that you are, you want to go in.
Bachelor's, undergrad, yeah.
Yeah, and just to see what you're passionate about. Yes, I want to go into retail. No, I want to go into finance. No, I want to go into education, whatever it may be. And so you in some sense lay at least a groundwork there. But then master's gives you the actual tools that you're going to need to go deeper into that arena. And then a PhD, kind of postgraduate, actually gives you the critical thinking skills that you actually need to contribute to the building of that area.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's felt like as I was, comparing bachelor's versus master's, it felt like quantity versus quality. So much of bachelor's felt like, length of paper was important, where once I got into master's, they didn't necessarily want length of paper. They wanted they wanted the quality of it, and more of a skill. Are you
mastering, an understanding? Because again, it's giving you the tools. Hey, I'm giving you the tools. I just want to see that. Yeah. Hey, are you able to really kind of give a quality understanding to that, that area?
Yeah.
Whereas again, your undergrad is giving you the knowledge, and hopefully again that you graduate with understanding, but it's more of the in-depth tools to actually construct, kind of a deeper understanding and grasp on the subject, the topic at hand.
Yeah, like you said, not just the knowledge, but for masters, the tools in which the ability to be a lifelong learner and in a more informed way, a deeper way, and a more directed way, I would say.
Yeah, nice. Well, congratulations.
Thank you so much. So let's dig into this week, Genesis making sense of mission. I love Genesis before this, but man, it's so good. Genesis is so good, especially as you're connecting it to mission. Oh my goodness. I'm appreciating the depth of this series every single week. And this is Genesis 30 and 31, the difficulty of life and the faithfulness of God. And this is May 16th through 18th, 2026. So we have this main point that we are walking through in this mini series of Jacob's life, where this main point of joining God on mission equals journeying with Him in redemption. The last couple weeks, you have been reminding us of that God is on mission to redeem a people from all peoples, to reflect His glory in all spheres of life. And you've given us these different legs of the journey that have been kind of the sub-main point.
Yeah.
And this week was all about this idea of fairness, life being unfair, and how God is faithful and true in the midst of that. And he really started by asking these questions. Do you believe the world is unfair? And then do you believe that you make unwise decisions? So this interesting dynamic between our life, the decisions we make, the way the world acts upon us, but then the way God really moves, over, regardless of any of those circumstances, to accomplish His purposes in the world. And this third leg, this main point for this third leg is life is unfair, and at times we are unwise and ungodly, but God is always faithful and true. And you take us through these lessons from Jacob. Jacob's first lesson was life is unfair. Second lesson is at times we're ungodly and wise. I see what you did there. You're basically just breaking down the main point.
Yeah.
And then his third lesson is God is always faithful and true. So let's look at this first question. One big word for this week.
The one big word probably is where I went difficult, the difficulty of life. So it's just difficult. Things are difficult. We make things difficult.
Yeah,
because difficult.
It's
people are difficult.
It's not just always that the world is happening to us. The difficulty is happening to us. We get to contribute to that difficulty.
So this is where Jacob is contributing to the difficulty. So that's where there's your word, difficult, and it's different than unfair or fair or faithful.
Yeah, because if you just looked at, I would say unfair, but that misses the arc of the story, because the arc actually gets ultimately to not focusing on the unfaithfulness or the unfairness, but it actually is focusing on who God is and His faithfulness, which is that these last few weeks have had an arc in the story, and there's a heaviness in the first couple points, but then that final point shows us the light, and it ultimately just serves to contrast who man is and who mankind is and who God is.
Yeah.
All right, so how about a big takeaway from this week while you were digging into this lesson?
I mean, gosh, a big takeaway, I've actually appreciated this series. I've preached these passages actually before, but I don't even remember. I have them in my files, but I have not consulted them because I've grown significantly in my understanding and knowledge since I've done them. And so by doing it around mission, here's a big takeaway, and I've really made sure I stress this, you have to keep in mind what God told Abraham if you want to understand what's going on here. And that's where the faithfulness of God is really attached to what He's promised, not Jacob.
Right.
And so interpreting,
right.
Interpreting that, and the big takeaway too is that, in the past, I think I was a little bit harder on Jacob. Even here, Jacob's he's a very difficult character to pin down, which is why I think a lot of scholars kind of, seesaw back and forth of, is he still the old Jacob? Well, here's the thing: we're always still the old us if we allow the flesh to kind of rear its ugly head, if we allow our sin nature. So this is part of where I wanted to be fair to him. But another big takeaway, and this is where I had to really stress verses 40 through 42, because when I was reading that, and verses 40 through 42 is where we see that, Jacob set apart the young of the flock by themselves, but made the rest face the streaked and dark colored animals that belonged to Laban. Now, I had to pause there for a second.
Okay.
Because here, this is, it can be confusing. Because what did Laban do the day that Jacob said, I will let these be my wages? He removed them.
Yeah.
And his sons were taking care of them. So when you read this in verse 40, you're like, oh, why do they belong to Laban? Because again, the ones that belong to Laban separated and took with his sons. Well, you have to understand the idea of Laban having changed his wages 10 different times across that 6-year period. Because this is just giving you, again, a synopsis versus, again, 37 all the way through 43 is giving you a synopsis of 6 years. So, because I was actually kind of confused. But then when you're like, well, it kind of makes sense now because Laban's changed the wages again, and so maybe this was part of it, and so that's a big, huge takeaway too. Is that this is part when you start reading, and this is where almost like an educational level, and but this is where you have to teach yourself to ask good questions and see the details of the passage. And I think a lot of times what happens, because I have a lot of people that come up to me and like, man, I've been a Christian for like 5 decades. Yeah. I've like read this passage 5 times. I've never seen the speckled spotted. Like, well, again, because there's not a lot of people that's preached on this either. I mean, and so that's where when you get into this text and you actually start taking notes and going, well, hey, hang on, wait a minute, because this is what we read early on, is that I want to remove, every speckled spotted sheep, every dark colored lamb, and every spotted or speckled goat. They will be my wages. And then Laban agreed. But then that same day, he removed all the male goats that were streaked or spotted and speckled, spotted female goats, all that had white on them, and on the dark colored lambs, and placed them in the care of his sons. Well, okay, then you read verse 40. Well, Jacob set apart the young of the flock by themselves, but made the rest face the streaked and dark colored animals that belonged to Laban. Why? So this is where you're asking these questions, and then the only thing that really makes sense is that, well, Laban's changed. He's changed the game. He's changed the rules. And so, but then it makes sense of verses 40 through 42 where Jacob's trying to stick it to Laban.
Well, and that's where you talk about the questions you ask. I do think it's helpful for us to read the passage, ask questions, be confused by it, reread it before we jump to study notes, commentaries, anything, right? Like there's something about us just sitting in the passage and rereading it over and over before we jump to somebody else's thoughts and ideas.
And that's where like and even this passage is a mixed bag because they're like, man, no one really fully understands what he's doing with the branches. But he's doing something with the branches.
There's no full alignment.
There's none. I mean, and then there's no full alignment. Is this him manipulating? Is this him, working? And this is part of where I feel like, the way I believe that the Spirit guided me through this is both and, which is what I try to show. But you have to keep, again, when you get to the part where, well, that doesn't make any sense based upon what we read a few verses earlier, but then it does make sense if you bring into light the change of wages 10 different times.
Yeah.
Okay, well, undoubtedly he changed the wages, so these did belong to Laban.
Yeah. Yeah, and I had previously read this as, man, this is a way that Jacob has been innovative and he's been wise. I think I had missed the point that you pulled out about how he was sticking it to Laban.
Yeah.
And then even more, I mean, we're jumping ahead, but there's this diagram where you say the Bible is clear about how we should approach our enemies. And that whole idea of, seeking the prosperity of the city and Babylon, and just kind of that whole overarching idea has been, I think, largely missing from my theology prior to you drawing that out. And that's been a theme that has helpful. And when you insert this into the way that Jacob is interacting with Laban, you see how the reason why it's so important to highlight he shouldn't be acting this way.
No. Well, it's making his life more difficult too, because even at the end of 6 years, and when again, I mean, so I don't want to get ahead, but he's he definitely is doing something with the weak and strong animals, and he doesn't want Laban to even remotely have any strong animals in his or among his flock.
Yeah.
So, and again, but that's part of where hermeneutics. So that's the big word of letting the Bible interpret the Bible. Mm-hmm. So, so obviously all of those passages that I shared come after Jacob, with the exception of Genesis 12. But that's why it was so important to see what Abraham was doing in Genesis 18 with Sodom and Gomorrah. He's really trying to seek their good, but using the righteous to actually bless the wicked. Mm-hmm. So, and again, this is what God has always wanted, but let the results of what God wants to do with people, leave them up to God, not us take matters into our own hands. And that's what, that's kind of what you see in that particular passage with the weak and the strong animals. And yeah. And it was funny because I had a lot. I could have put up a slide about what are the qualities of a weak animal, what are the qualities of a strong animal, but I'm like, well, that would have been more time. Yeah. And I just kind of said them in passing, and so. But it was fun. I mean, like, how does he know? But because we're not herders, so we don't know. We have a pet, and that's part of and that's where I'm like, if you ever had if you had a pet, you kind of know when they're lethargic, when they're not really healthy.
Yep. Yeah, so before you dug into these lessons, you were recapping for us, the different legs, and even giving us the definition of mission, God's mission. And you said the goal of recapping all this is not just for our enjoyment to hear it again, but you ultimately want us to be able to teach this. Mm-hmm. You want us to be able to communicate this. You don't want us just to sit and listen, but you said, I want you to communicate this to essentially your sphere of influence, everybody that God has kind of put around you. So the intent of God's mission is to save you and me so that we might mirror who God is in the world, so that they might know that there's a God who wants to transform them, save them, change them. That's what, those of you that are listening to Extra Takes, you are taking this an extra step, and I do think that you are creating for yourself a posture that is allowing you to learn in a deeper way. Mm-hmm. But it should not just stop, and to your point, it shouldn't just stop with the head knowledge, but you should challenge yourself to how are you communicating this? How are you able to verbalize what God's mission is, and even these points, because this transformation that is occurring in you, in us, is not ultimately just for your benefit. It's for the benefit of others. So I just love that point. You really drew out, hey, I'm repeating myself and being repetitive, but first of all, I know that. And second of all, there's a purpose for this. Yeah. And you don't hear that often, especially from a stage like that I think you always have to push against this picture of, hey, this is a show, and there's this big separation between from the stage to the audience, and can feel like we're just spectators. So you verbalizing this and saying, hey, you are part of this, and we want you to be active in this, I think was so important, and just so empowering. I'd love to hear you say that more, and hey, I want you to be able to teach this. Really? You want us to be able to teach this? Oh, I can teach. We can teach this? Yes, you can teach it. No, it's not going to be in the same words and at the same level, but like, we can all start with who's around us. Yeah. I love it. So let's look at Jacob's first lesson. You asked this question, how will you respond when life is unfair? It's really interesting. This passage goes back and forth between Jacob, doing things that we would want to emulate, that Jacob doing things that we'd want to, follow, and then doing things that we wouldn't want to follow. And it can feel a little bit like whiplash, because we're kind of like, wait, is he supposed to be a model for us or not?
Well, he is a model for humanity. He's definitely a model, and he is not the hero, and that's the element. So we read the Old Testament very differently than we would read, Homer's Iliad or Odyssey or any of the stories of the past. Is that there's a hero in there, but Jacob's not the hero. God is the hero. Jacob is the conduit by which God is showing himself to be the hero of humanity. So that's a big, huge difference between how you ought to read the Bible versus how you read other stories. We obviously we believe this is not a fable or a myth, that this story actually happened. Yeah. And I'm actually convinced more than in some sense ever that the stories of the Old Testament and really the history of Israel is in some sense the narrative that the New Testament theology helps us to actually understand, because Adam, all of the characters like Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Moses and Joshua and all of like these leaders and stuff, they really are, acting in two particular ways. They are showing us how humanity, even those who are redeemed, man, we need not just help, we need intervention. We need God. We need a hero. And then on the other side, it actually is projecting a foreshadowing of and this is part of, again, the hero element, but it's also projecting out and going, there is a better Jacob coming, there is a better Moses coming, there is a better Abraham coming, that will actually fulfill God's, promises. Because I'll give you an example about how it is with Jacob. So think about, Jacob when he's responding when life is unfair. So the first part is he doesn't complain. He goes to work. He works harder than before. He innovates. He adopts. He strategizes. He discerns. He doesn't give up. He keeps on moving. Well, you're like, great, but it doesn't end there. So life continues to be unfair, and then he becomes jaded. He's like, I will stick it to you. Well, think about, the better Jacob, meaning Jesus, who is the hero, he is God in flesh. He never tried to stick it to those who manipulated him, those who deceived him, those who betrayed him, those who changed. He never tried to stick it to them. He actually went to the cross to actually redeem them. So here, so that's why God is, so Jacob, he's actually foreshadowing an even better Jacob. And you're also looking at him going, well, he ain't the hero. It looked like it. Oh my gosh. Oh yeah, he doesn't complain. Oh, he stuck it to Laban. All right, so he's not the hero. So this is part of where, there's this tension that the Old Testament has created that leads up to the big reveal in the New Testament, is that God is the hero. All of these characters aren't the hero, but there are elements of these characters that are pointing to the greater hero.
That's so good.
So like Jonah would be an example of that. Okay, so he begrudgingly goes to Nineveh. Well, Jesus doesn't begrudgingly go to the cross. He does it with joy, who for the joy set before him. So Jonah, okay, so that's part of where you gotta, that's where like the New Testament, other than the narrative of the Gospels of Jesus's, birth, life, death, resurrection, all of the other elements of the New Testament are really more of this epistle form of theologizing the gospel.
Yeah.
So basically, you have the life of Jesus and the theologizing of really Paul and Luke with Acts, but that's still narrative form. That's an extension of Luke. So you got all these epistles that really are theologizing what happened and how you can interpret the Old Testament in light of who Jesus is. So that's why I love these stories, because you don't have these stories in the New Testament, because our life is actually mirrored in the Old Testament. We just now can make sense of them, of them, meaning the stories, through the lens and the filter of Jesus' death and resurrection.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful in terms of we can sometimes call these Bible characters heroes of the faith, but it's a helpful reminder that God is the hero, Jesus is the hero. None of them are heroes, and it's easy to see that as you're reading through these stories. It feels like each of these Old Testament stories really go out of their way to show the boneheadedness and sinfulness of these heroes, and it's remarkable. I mean, you read it, and then you read David. Oh yeah, David, man, after God's on our. Oh my goodness, what just happened?
Horrible father, murderer, adulterer.
Yeah, you're like, Jacob. Yeah, this is. Oh my goodness, what are you doing? What are you doing? So we can relate to him in this yo-yo-ness of faithfulness and then sinfulness and just.
But I will draw your attention though, because I don't want you to use that as an excuse.
Okay.
Because yes, we can look at them and we can go, oh my gosh, and we can see a lot of ourselves in them, which we ought to. But here's what Hebrews 11 talks about.
Yeah.
So these were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. So therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. Because again, we see all of these saints of old, man, there's a lot of entanglement there. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. Okay, so what the author of Hebrews is saying is like, look at these saints, their faith. Oh my gosh, what incredible faith. It's almost like, again, a who's who of the Old Testament, but the author of Hebrews is telling us, but we have something better. So that's part of where we're held to a higher even standard, because they were looking forward in anticipation, and they didn't have what we have today. We have the death and resurrection of Jesus, and we have the Spirit of God, the Spirit, Holy Spirit, that Jesus has actually deposited into each one of us. So there is going to be this combo of, we're going to be like Jacob a lot of times, but Jesus is actually, he's actually done something far better than what they even experienced, and we actually have the Spirit of God living inside of us, actually going to work, shaping and forming us even more powerfully today than Jacob was then.
That's remarkable.
And that's something I'm wanting to stress in this idea of mission, is that God, He's faithful, but I want you to understand part of His faithfulness now, and that whole list, and we'll get to that whole list that I read, those are a lot of New Testament, even though some of them were still in the Old Testament. But this is, again, the New Testament is actually making sense of the Old Testament, but we have something even more powerful. We have the risen Messiah. We have the risen King who has imputed His righteousness and indwelt us with His Spirit. Again, something that Moses didn't have, something that Jacob didn't have, something that David didn't have. They had moments where, like, the Spirit came on them in a powerful way, but again, not only like a handful, no more than a handful of people. So.
Yeah, that's a remarkable reminder for us. So let's look at Jacob's second lesson, and this is, at times we are ungodly and unwise. The principle here is, at times the unfairness we experience can lead to ungodly expressions. And this is where you draw out Jacob ceasing to work toward Laban's good. And you drill down into this principle a couple different ways. You said it is one thing to work towards God's promise. It is another thing to begin to work towards someone else's punishment. And this is where you see this distinction of what Jacob starts doing with Laban. And you said it's one thing to partner with God in his promise. It is another thing to play God executing his punishment. And that's where this list of, I believe that's where it is, the Bible is clear, where you talk about Genesis 12 and Jeremiah 29. You're talking about Matthew 5, turning the other cheek, love your enemies. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord, and do not repay evil with evil. And this importance of drawing the distinction of who Jacob is and what God's promises are, but what we are ultimately, what our role ultimately is, and what God's role ultimately is. And our role is not to play God in executing his punishment.
Yeah, going back to working towards God's promise. And again, you got to go back to Genesis 12. I didn't want to be redundant there because I knew I was going to come back to Genesis 12 later. But his working towards God's promise was, again, being faithful with what God has given him. So yes, like, tending the flock, caring for the flock, working hard, this is a big point I hope you took away, is that in an unfair world, when things are already working against you and a disadvantage, you're going to have to work harder. I mean, it's just the God's honest truth. You're going to have to work harder. But again, you're working hard as a reflection of God, not because, well, I've got to make things happen. No, but this is part of where you're partnering with God in that. But then when you look at, so Jacob could have been working just towards God's promise, but where it shifted is when he's really now working for Laban's punishment. Because Genesis 12 doesn't tell him to do that. This again where God says, I will bless those who bless you and I will curse those who curse you. He's not asking Jacob to curse. He's not asking Abraham to curse. I mean, think about it. Abraham's not cursing Sodom and Gomorrah. He's actually trying to bless them, even though they're wicked. So Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, they're supposed to be working for the blessing of the world. And so therefore they are a conduit of God's grace in the world. Well, so again, when Jacob is now trying to stick it to Laban, then he actually shifts and he no longer is working towards God's promise. He's actually trying to play the part of God. And that's where I wanted you to see where the Bible is really clear, because this is part of where I do think that, and again, you're having to try to interpret a narrative through the biblical hermeneutical, and that's a big word, hermeneutical lens of allowing the Bible to interpret the Bible. So here's the thing. Obviously, we do see God cursing Laban even in this and still blessing Jacob, which again is just God's grace in Jacob's life. But by Jacob doing what he did, he actually makes things even more difficult for himself over that 6-year period, because that's where I'm saying Jacob's brother-in-laws come to, not necessarily come to him, but like start complaining. Jacob has literally stole our inheritance. Let me ask you don't think God could have, in some sense, increased Jacob's possessions while also maintaining Laban's possessions? And then when Jacob is ready to go home, they're like sending them off. And then after Jacob is sent off, God is going to bring pestilence and actually wipe out Laban's herd. He could have done that too. But again, when Jacob's taken upon himself playing God, then the difficulty of him playing God also comes into light, where it makes his relationships even more difficult with his brother-in-laws and his father-in-law. Yeah. And so he's got to bear the brunt of that, which leads to unwise decisions. Okay, so it is a cycle, but just notice how God's grace works even in that cycle. Like we're going to see this next week, where Jacob is going to have to face his greatest fear. And his greatest fear is Esau. Why? Because of how he left Esau. So he's going to actually have to face his greatest fear because of his jackwagonness. You know, I like how I just made up that word, but how he left things because of how he tried to play God. He wanted God's promise, but he was going to get it in hellish ways. He's going to have to face that. Well, he's facing the music for his ungodly expressions of trying to stick it to Laban, because they see that, you know, he's been doing things, he's been working against us. Yeah. And again, it just shows God's grace that he's going to do what he has promised to us. But there are times we make our lives more difficult because we're not doing things according to the plan of God. And so that's something, I mean, it's so powerful, which is why I was trying to build it, and maybe I did a decent job, but here's where the Bible is clear, and then how life's unfairness can lead us to be ungodly, and how our unhealthy fear can lead us to make unwise decisions, because it was all cyclical in Jacob's life.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, and that's where after that diagram you gave us, both of those other diagrams of how life's unfairness can lead to us being ungodly and then unwise.
So think about this. All right, let's say you retaliate. Mm-hmm. So they punch you, you punch back, and here's the thing, you both go to jail. When again, that's how, if an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Or you give a silent treatment. Okay, so your spouse, man, they lost their stuff on you. Okay, they were in the wrong. It was unfair. But then if you give them the silent treatment, guess what you do? You precipitate the unhealthiness of that relationship. If you throw their past in front of that, in their face. But again, I know what they did to you was unfair. But if you're trying to retaliate, then you create a cycle. If you work at a job and they reprimand you unfairly, and then you stop trying altogether, and then they notice it, and then you lose your job. Listen, you did that. They didn't do that. So they reprimanded you unfairly. Okay, but if you stop trying and then you get fired because they see that you stopped trying, listen, that's on you. See, Jacob has to bear the weight of his ungodly expression. And then if you seek to sabotage, people, and you work against them, and again, you wonder why, you wonder why there is a cycle, just a cycle of unhealthiness when again, I understand the unfairness, but that's the idea of turning the other cheek, is that God is calling you to break the cycle of injustice, to break the cycle of unfairness, to break the cycle of violence. I mean, to break the cycle of unhealthiness. If you're trying to slander and to damage their reputation. I mean, again, this is what American politics do, but it's really based upon the unhealthy concept of human beings. Is that you damaged me, I'm going to damage you. You hurt me. This is why hurt people hurt people. So again, I just want you to see that how life's unfairness can lead us to be ungodly, but it leads us into an unhealthy, dysfunctional, difficult life of a merry-go-round that, again, we see with Jacob. I mean, so he's in this dysfunctional family that he's been in for 20 years, and he's never tried to stop it.
Yeah, and you gave us a bit of a zinger when you said, when you say serves them right, he said, I promise you this does not reflect the heart of Jesus.
No, it doesn't, because what serves them right is death, hell, and judgment. I mean, that's what, that's, if God says that, then he would not have sent Jesus to the cross. Serves them right. I mean, if God would be saying that, now there is coming a day when Jesus come back a second time, he's going to be saying, it serves you right. Yeah. You had this time, but you did not repent. You will get what you deserve. But right now, we are living in, and when I say an era of grace, because of the cross of Calvary. And I can promise you, God's not pointing a finger saying it's serving you right. He's pointing a finger to the cross and says, listen, this serves you grace. So this is part part of our response to unfairness is how do we serve up grace? Now, I want to give you a caveat. If somebody has broken the law, and when I mean like you have truly been a victim of injustice, I'm not telling you that you ought not to use the legal system for justice to be served. Okay, so that's not what I'm telling you. But with what we're seeing in this particular story. Now, here's the thing. If they were living in a when I say a just society where there were laws, where you couldn't, change the wages, then Jacob, he wouldn't retaliate. He would take it. He would take it to the court and going, you, based upon the laws of our society, you can't do this. So this is part of where, in this kind of tribal society, you are at the mercy of the tribe. Even when you move forward into the Old Testament with the laws that God gives Israel, then they are to take it to judges to settle the dispute. So I'm not telling you that you ought to eat being the victim of injustice, especially if what they have done has broken the laws of the land, because that's actually part of God's grace and mercy in societies and cultures, is that you actually have laws that are to govern the wholeness of the land. Okay, but we don't have that right now.
Yeah.
But there are things in our life. Okay, so they badmouthed you, they slandered you. Okay, so they unrightfully, and unfairly reprimanded you. Okay, you were terminated. Because they did some they done some shady stuff, and they lost money, and they had to let people go. Okay, that's unfair. They're like, and when I say shady stuff, I mean maybe they made bad decisions. Okay, now if they did do shady stuff and illegal stuff, well, they need to be held accountable, but you still lost your job. It's unfair. So, but even then, like, how do you respond? Now, I couldn't have said all of that this past weekend. I didn't have the time.
Right.
But this is why we do extra takes.
Yeah.
Okay?
There we go.
So you're welcome, and then this is why you ought to share extra takes, because I couldn't set it up. I had to deal with the context of the text where it's not a just society. Sure. And I would even say that even in America, we have a more just society than they do in other parts of the world. Praise God. But nevertheless, there's a lot more unfairness that happens to us daily and weekly, monthly, and yearly that you cannot, when I say legislate against, and you won't be able to, in some sense, go seek a just society. So that's where, humanly speaking, we tend to want to give a tit for a tat.
Yep.
And the Bible will say, don't do that.
Well, and this takes us to this third lesson where Jacob learns that God is always faithful and true. And we look at God's faithfulness to Jacob and how God is faithful and true to his promise today. So one of the things you said as we were looking of his faithfulness, of his promises today, he said there are many Christians in America who will be disappointed. And you talked about, it does not matter the direction of America. It matters, the direction of what the church is true to. Talk a little bit about where that conviction came from and what you were trying to draw out on that point.
Well, because there are people that would read this and see the prosperity of Jacob. So we see, in this way, the man grew exceedingly prosperous and came to own large flocks and female and male servants and camels and donkeys. And oh my, I'm like, this, and it's kind of like, wow, I want God to do that for me. But again, you have to understand it in the context of Genesis 12.
Yeah.
Now, and again, this is what God's doing in the Old Testament. And there is a continuation of it, but there's also a discontinuity of it as well. Okay, so let me talk about the discontinuity. discontinuity. And here's what discontinuity. So there's a book I read years ago called Continuity and Discontinuity in the Old and New Testament. And so continuity means what is continuous of the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Discontinuity means what basically ended in the Old Testament. Okay. So this is where it's so important, and this is where PhD world, type stuff really does come in, because you're really learning now to really think very deeply. So
And very specifically.
And it goes back to my PhD in mission. Now, if my PhD was in something else, I probably wouldn't know this.
In an area that, you go deep in an area that someone hasn't gone deep in before.
So if I have a PhD in sports science, I'm probably not going to know a lot of this. Even if I've studied the Bible on myself, unless I've known to think deeply. Okay, so, all right. So you have to, again, go back to Genesis 12. I will make your name great. Okay. And part of the making your name great is I'm going to make you into a great nation. Mm-hmm. Well, okay, in that context and in that world, what does a great nation have? A great nation has land. A great nation has wealth. A great nation is prosperous. A great nation, again, so they didn't print money. They didn't even necessarily have gold in that day. I mean, there were obviously some silver and shekels and all of that. But where wealth was made was through servants and livestock and land and the bountiful produce that the land gave. Okay, so you have to understand in that context, so if God is going to take this one man who doesn't have any land and he's going to give them land, then part of what he's got to do, part of what God's got to do in that land is to increase and multiply what is in that land. So the produce and the livestock in that land. Why? Because now it makes them wealthy to other nations to buy and sell. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you have to keep that in mind. All right. So now we have Isaac and Rebekah, and they only got they got two sons, but only one can be the son of promise. All right. So again, Isaac and Rebekah doesn't have a lot other than that little plot of land. That was the cave of Machpelah. That's all they got in this land. Mm-hmm. And so but they also got all of these herds that Abraham, so hopefully they're multiplying and all that. Well, Jacob has not a dime that sucker has not a dime to his name when he goes north.
He slept on a rock.
He slept on a rock. But now, 20 years later, look at what God has done through his sheer grace to Jacob, but his faithfulness to his promise. Mm. So he has worked through the deception of Laban. He has worked through the sticking it, that Jacob gave to Laban. I mean, he's worked through everything to increase the flock so that when Jacob comes back home, holy cow, look at what he has. Okay?
So this building of wealth.
So the building of wealth is not because Jacob's a great guy. It's because God is a great God. And that's what you got. I will make you into a great nation. Like, if you didn't do anything, this is literally what God is telling Abraham. You don't have to do anything other than be my conduit, because I'm going to do this. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to make your name great, where people will go, oh my gosh, you see or you see Abraham, woo! And then Jacob, oh my gosh, you see what somebody's got to be behind Jacob. Somebody's got to be behind him. So I'll make your name great. Okay. So the discontinuity of the Old Testament and New Testament is God is no longer geographically bound by creating his people into a great nation, which is why, and I will just turn there just so that, again, you see it in the Bible of the continuity but discontinuity. This is in 1 Peter chapter 2. Again, I just want to, pull it out because I need you to see this in the text. All right, so 1 Peter 2 says, you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Now, who is he talking to? to God's elect, exiles, scattered throughout the province of Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, Bithynia, who have been chosen according to the foreknowledge of God the Father through the sanctifying work of the Spirit to be obedient to Jesus Christ and sprinkled with his blood. He is actually talking to Gentiles. So this idea of a holy nation is not bound geographically, where God is geographically building a geopolitical entity like he was building in the Old Testament through Israel.
Yeah.
They failed.
Yeah.
God dispersed them. But now what God is doing through the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus and the sending out of his church, he is building one people from every tribe, every nation, every tongue, every people group, which is a holy nation unto themselves, where Jesus is the king of that nation. Again, not a geopolitical reality, but a people from all different peoples, okay? Mm-hmm. So now you have to interpret the New Testament in light of this new thing that God is doing, because that's what God said through the prophet Isaiah. Behold, I'm doing a new thing. Do you not perceive it? Okay, so this is part of where the truth of God's faithfulness to Jacob actually still is continuous.
Yeah.
So he is, here's the thing, I do believe that he is prospering his church. Mm-hmm. But it's not in the manner that we see in the Old Testament. I do believe that he is protecting his church from the Labans of the world. I do believe that God sees all the injustice that nations and that pagan tribes and lost people do to us. I believe that. And do I believe that God, this is part of the reason why, it's not that we need to make sure that the nation of America is in some sense reclaimed for God. We just need to make sure that a pluralistic nation like America understands that if you do anything to hurt his church, it will be curses upon you. So I do believe that. Like if you look at even what's happening in Iran and in the Middle East, if they curse the church, I can promise you it's going to be just a matter of time before God curses them. It's not yet. So it's not about their relationship with America. It's about their relationship to how they treat God's church. Okay, so anyways. And that's where, so that's the faithfulness of God, which is part of the reason why I labeled it out the way I did. The gates of hell will not prevail against his church. Listen, Iran, the Ayatollah will not be able to stop God's church. The communistic party in China will not be able to stop God's church. They can try. They can try to impose fear. They can try to impose oppression, persecution. But here's what we know throughout history: you will not be able to stop God's church. Okay, so the gates of hell will not prevail against it. He's faithful to keep our relationship intact with the Father. He will provide it. And this is where these are the things that we know God is faithful to do. And those are the promises that we can proclaim. Those are the ones that we can name it and claim it. It ain't that we can name it and claim it of the house we want, the car we want to drive, the bank account that we own. No. That's not the name it and claim it. The name it and claim it is the promises that God has made on behalf of his mission in the world through his church. Now, does his church and the advancement of his church, do they need kind of churches and God's people? Do they need resources? Do they need money? Yeah, but I can promise you this: if you ain't faithful in the small stuff, if you ain't tithing, if you ain't giving, if you ain't being generous, I can promise you, you ain't got the blessing of God behind you. I can promise you that. So this is part of where I'm like, yes, does God want to prosper his people? Does he want to bless his people so that his people would be a blessing? Yes, that is a continuous nature. So this is where you have to understand what continues from the Old Testament to the New, and what discontinues from the Old Testament to the New Testament. So That's what I want to be very clear about. Any part that was not clear about there, Matthew?
No, man.
In your masters.
No, that's, I mean, there's a lot there.
There is a lot there. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot there. And gosh, it's so important for us to recognize how we have to always untangle our culture, our identity away from whatever culture, whatever nation we are in.
And a lot of times you got to untangle the theology you were taught as a kid. Because they were a great guy that loved Jesus doesn't mean, and again, they were faithful to what they knew.
Yeah.
But just because they were faithful to what they knew doesn't mean that they were faithful to what was right. And the idea, going back to the reason why I said what I said, is that when I explained just what I just explained, in some sense, it wouldn't set well with American Christians, because we want the comfort, we want the convenience. God, why aren't you blessing me? Why am I struggling financially? Why can't I get this? Why isn't my business growing? Why? And it's kind of like, okay, you have all of these questions, and you're like, God, I want you to bless me, bless me, bless me. And it's kind of like that. That is not actually the reason why He saved you. Now, here's the thing, and I didn't say this in all of the services, but I did say it at the 9 o'clock. At the end of the day, Jacob's reward was God. Jacob's reward wasn't all of his possessions.
Yeah.
And that's what he needed to know. And actually, that's what he's going to know in chapter 32. That's what he's going to know in chapter 32, is that God is his reward. And that's where I want us to realize that if God didn't do anything else in our life, if we went bankrupt, if we had boils on our head and our feet, God has done more than enough in sending Jesus to be the propitiation, meaning the mediation and the sacrifice for our sin and the division that we called between us and God. Like, if He, again, did nothing else in blessing us, He gave us more than enough in Jesus so that we have the hope of glory that we have life everlasting in Jesus, knowing that this world is not our home, and these are really just the birth pangs of true life that is coming. Okay, wow. So that's the reason why I understand that when I do this, and I'm really drawing a true understanding of what the Bible teaches, people aren't going like, "Hey, that's awesome! Oh my gosh, that's awesome!" They're thinking, okay, well, the gates of hell won't prevail against the church. Well, what about my business? The gates of hell won't prevail against the church. Well, what about my finances? Okay, He will provide all that I need. Well, I got some wants too, and it's kind of like. But here's the thing, though. There are a lot of things that we consider needs that really are wants in the eyes of the world. And we just need to understand that God has, again, tremendously blessed us. And I do believe this, that if we can learn to be faithful stewards, when I say faithful stewards, like, and again, I go back to even how Proverbs would teach us how to set up our finances. So we give first. So if you can be a faithful steward, I'm going to give you, again, this isn't a formula for prosperity, but I will say this is a formula for blessing, holistic blessing. But if you can learn to give first, then you can save second, and then you can live third. And then after living, you have some money to invest, because investment multiplies. Okay, so giving is what God requires. Like, you give off the top, you give off the first fruits. Like, you don't touch that money. And you're learning to live with, at the very least, 90% of what you have coming in. But then you save. So now I'm going to start setting some stuff back, because here's what we do know: we live in a fallen world, and God knows that we live in He's the one redeeming it. So he knows that there's pestilence going to come, because part of living in a fallen world is to begin to look for redemption. But if you follow the steps of what God has provided, that you give to him first, you save second for a rainy day of living in a fallen world, then you live, and then you actually have investments. Let me tell you what God has already done for you. If you follow his plan, he has created the protection so that you, through the blessing of God, through the wisdom of God, you endure the rainy seasons. But see, what happens, and this is why I say American Christians. Man, I'm preaching. This is the Spirit of God in me. This ain't me. But here's the thing. American Christians, what do we want to do? We want to live first, and then, oh my gosh, we're so strapped. We don't really have much to give, and then we aren't really saving much other than, what we're doing with Social Security, and then you can't really access Social Security until you're like 65, and so you're really not able to even save because you spent everything. You're not able to give much of anything, and then you're not saving a big amount, and then you can't even invest. And then we want God to bless us. And he's like, listen, I gave you the formula of holistic blessing, but you ain't listening to me. And then when you get tired, when you get worn out from living as an American, you want me to come and save you. Listen, I've already saved your tail. I've already brought you into the fold. I've already redeemed you. I've given you my word. I've given you a community that teaches the word, but you ain't listening. You ain't listening. And so then that's where I'm coming back here to go, American Christians don't like this because it, in some sense, doesn't cater to their wants and the lifestyle that they think they are supposed to have.
Well,
that's well worth the extra takes right there.
That was a bonus.
That was because
You said that formula. What did you say that was in Proverbs?
Yeah, when you look at how and I think I may have even taught it here before.
Okay, I don't recall.
And because it's give, save. I mean, some people will put invest before live, but you definitely give off the top. Mm-hmm. You save because again, you're putting it back. Because this is part of where the book of Proverbs talks about that you ought to save for your children's children.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And that could also be, interpreted as an investment. Mm-hmm. But nevertheless, you give, you save, then you live, and then you can invest if you got some. But again, but think about those three things of, giving, saving, and investing. Those three things are so important. I mean, what you actually see with Joseph, we'll see next year. He is absolutely saving for the famine that is coming. Because God told him that. So God told him that the famine is coming. He starts saving, and it was because of Joseph's saving that was based upon God's grace in his life. They became a source of redemption for the world. Like that's the thing about the church, and and so and really what I'm actually trying to do in leading the church is so that we even as a church we're building up reserves, we're building up savings, we're building up investments based upon models where our tithes and our offerings are going strictly to ministry rather than buildings and and maintenance and all of that. Sure. And so because if we can do that, we can build reserves, then the church can actually be more of a beacon of benevolence. So again, this is part of where it's so important. Give, save, live, invest. Give, save, live, invest.
Yeah, that's awesome. And where you ended this weekend was the faithfulness of God. God is faithful even in an unfair world. He is faithful even when we're ungodly. He's faithful even when we're unwise, and God will accomplish what He promised.
Yeah. Were you in the 9 o'clock or the 11?
The 9.
So at the 11, and this goes back to what I just explained. There is a difference between covenantal faithfulness and consumeristic faithfulness.
Oh, okay.
You see, God is always going to be faithful to the covenant. So what we're seeing with Jacob is covenantal faithfulness.
Okay.
It's not consumeristic faithfulness. Again, we look at the production and the multiplication of sheep and lambs and goats and donkeys and camels and go, oh my gosh. And then again, we want to equate that to us today. But the way we equate it, or way some people equate today, is actually really through more of what I would call consumeristic faithfulness, is that God blesses and prospers me for my sake. That is not what he's doing here with Jacob. He is prospering Jacob for his name's sake, so that God would be glorified among the nations. And so, again, God is the reward in covenantal faithfulness. Prosperity is the reward for consumeristic faithfulness. So when we're not prosperous, we blame God, which is part of the reason why I'm like, I need to be very clear about this, because if you understand the Bible wrong, you might find yourself disappointed with God. And I don't want you to be disappointed with God, because there is no reason why we should actually be disappointed with God.
You said God is our reward in covenantal faithfulness.
Yeah.
But His prosperity is the reward in consumeristic faithfulness. Oh man, that's really good. Awesome.
So where your reward is, and here's the thing, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. I think there was a person who said that.
Yeah. Put that in tonight. Covenantal and consumeristic.
I won't be able to put it. I did. Well, I put it at the 11.
I'm saying put it in tonight.
Yeah, but I'm not preaching tonight.
Oh, okay.
No, Ellie, as all of you know, Ellie is graduating, and so we have like a whole week of festivities. So we got something Monday night for her. She walks Thursday. So
good for you.
They will be playing. They will be playing the message, I think, from 9 o'clock, so they can see me cry about Ellie.
You did cry.
Oh, I was, and that was legit.
Man, that just like got you. Holy cow!
It did. So
I don't know how you turned that corner.
Well, I say I got to think about something else. I got to think about something else.
Yeah.
Got to think about my grandma in a swimsuit or something. I'm just joking. Yeah.
You know what? If you made it an hour into, that's a little something extra for you.
Something extra for you. Well, Northland family and friends, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Extra Takes. Until next time, blessings.
Thanks for listening to Extra Takes. Be sure to follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts so you won't miss a single episode.